The following preview has been rated Good Weird by Nicho.
And Just Good by Chris.
By the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast. Please check out the full episode when it releases on Wednesday. In this episode, 3 men enter the zone, and 3 men come out.
That's true. Yeah, nobody dies.
Yeah, I didn't know how to write a intro for this preview, but yeah, it's such a minimal. We're doing Stalker, the 1979 Tarkovsky flick.
Yes, and this is one of those ones where, like, yeah, how does one really write a good intro to this movie? Because this movie is 2 hours and 40 minutes of Russian artsy science fantasy film.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing too. We chose this one because it is kind of counter to the 10 Commandments, where
it is still a somewhat religious film, but it is so lightly handed that a lot of people can miss it entirely. And
also a very minimalistic film compared to the somewhat extravagant sets, the lots of dialogue that's got going on.
Yeah, they had a much bigger budget restraint, a much bigger time restraint, and on top of that, this is a film shot in a very different passion project-y sort of way. Mm-hmm. Like, this is clearly, like, a big deal to the writer, the director, and the actors do a fantastic job in this, but it is one of those films where every single shot feels like something that could be hung on the wall, whereas with the 10 Commandments, the entire production feels like a stage play as opposed to, like, a photograph.
Yeah, more of like a journey instead of a retelling of a classic tale.
Oh, for sure. And this is one of those ones too where a lot of it is so up in the air of how you could interpret it, how you can see things. Granted, the director and the writer, they've talked about how, they know what it's about, and they're not shy about it, not like other directors who come back later. They're not shy about it, they don't change it throughout the years. Like, it's a few details here or there might have, like, shifted, but honestly, they have a vision, but it is a vision of a movie so lightly colored that you are not remiss, or even, like, they're not even mad at you for being like, oh, well, when I watched it and I saw this. Mm-hmm. They're not even upset if that happens. They're just like, well, you missed what I was going for, but I like it.
Kind of. He doesn't really talk about the audience relation to it. It's just like, here's what he believes it to be about, and it's very authoritative, I think. Very true.
A lot of people did connect this film with Chernobyl, but not anything by what he did. That's just the timeline of the world lined up so that when people were watching this on DVD, the Chernobyl, like, was being built and, like, was a thing in people's conscious and on their news. And, the parallels, despite him not having put them there, are undeniable. Mm-hmm. And so, like, it was one of those things where, like, during interviews when people were asking him about that, he's like, well, I can see why. It's not what I was going for, but I get it.
Yeah, and even now, like, after talking about it and kind of coming to some conclusions, I still have so many questions about this movie that I don't think I'll ever really have an answer for, just because I don't have that quote-unquote grounded faith / I also don't have that desire to have a room that solves all my issues, because I'm pretty straightforward and I know who I am, but...
Sure, and I do think that this movie, like, has room for that sort of exploration as well. Like, multiple times different characters talk about their desires for the room, and honestly, like, each time they talk about it, either something is added on, or it's changed, or it's, refined a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those films that, like, it's not so artsy that there is no good interpretation. It's so artsy that there is no bad interpretation.
Yeah, I'd say there could be some bad interpretations, but...
There could be, but it's one of those things where, like, if you watched the whole movie from start to finish, and you felt like the theory that you started out with still holds, there's really nothing wrong with that. It's definitely one of those ones where, like, there's stronger arguments one way or the other, depending on how much background research you wanted to do.
But it's hard to argue an absolute truth, I guess.
For sure. And I also really like that this movie, despite having really, like, the main trio, there's a limited cast, and each one is close enough and on the similar journey, but they are all different enough that you could watch it from a bunch of different perspectives, too.
Yeah, I can see that. I think this is one that I'll definitely be interested in re-exploring down the line. Maybe not immediately, and same with his other stuff, because they all follow a similar pattern and pacing and style.
Sure.
But they're interesting in their own right, too, in their own explorations.
Oh, for sure. I really enjoyed this. Artsy films are not normally, like, my go-to, but I did enjoy this one. I don't know how quickly I'm going to rush to rewatch it, since I've now watched it twice back-to-back. But it was one of those ones where I think the only thing holding me back from it was the length of the movie. It is a little long. For a film that I have to focus very intently if I'm going to understand any of the dialogue, because unfortunately I don't speak a single word of Russian. So whereas normally with like some films, especially Spanish films, I can get away with like looking away. Even honestly, Japanese films, I can get away with like not looking the entire film because a lot of like the exclamations or like some little background chitter chatter, like I know enough of the words to be like, okay, now I need to pay attention. Versus now I could like maybe, you know, shift around, get a little drink, have a handful of popcorn. Yeah. This one you really do need to be paying attention almost the whole thing, despite how slow-paced it is. Yeah,
it'd be interesting to look at other Russian films of the era, because outside of Tarkovsky, I'm only really familiar with, like, Battleship Potemkin.
Yeah, I would also be very interested, and, like, I've only seen 2 of his films. I know you have a couple more in your stash. I'm very interested in seeing more of his. I'm gonna have to space them out, though, because the slow pace, the big camera zooms are, like, his feature thing. And while they are beautiful, I do need something to, you know, ignite the brain cells a little in between the two.
Yeah, I can see that a little bit. Sometimes the visuals don't do everything for everyone.
No, and, like, I enjoyed it, don't get me wrong, but it is going to be one of those ones where you're either going to really enjoy having watched it, or this is, you're going to have the mom who sits there on the couch and is constantly like, what are they doing? What was that?
Yeah.
Where are they? Like, if you're one of those people, this is probably not for you.
Exactly, so... But anywho, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird previews.
Thanks for listening. Check out the full episode.
Peace!